Good, welcome to the first bite size of this session. Everything you never wanted to know about Maven versions. You don't want to know, but you need to know. So, very briefly about me, I'll keep it short because it's a bite size. Two things I want to point out. Shout out to my employer, Group 9, who allows me to be here. And next to that, we're working on founding the Brabantjug together with Remco and Tom here in the front. So if you're around Brabant or live there, stay tuned, we'll be with you. But back to Maven versions. First of all, why? Why this talk? Well, I had an assignment at a client where we had a very complicated setup in our release pipeline and something had to be done about it. And unfortunately, the complexity of the release and the branching structure was not the first thing I could tackle. Another thing I could tackle first required me to hash out how Maven actually interprets versions, and also to hash out how tar does that and align that. That's not something that's very clearly documented, so I really had to dive in, try it out, and I did that so you don't have to. So this is a typical Maven version. You might recognize this 1.2.0-snapshot. It's built up of some components. The 1 is the major version, 2 is the minor version, 0 is incremental, and the snapshot is called the qualifier by Maven. So far so good, easy. This is just semantic versioning with a little twist with the qualifier. Nothing really troublesome, right? Cannot be difficult. Well, you're wrong. And I was wrong when I thought that. Because what we saw so far is the terminology used by the class default artifact version, one of the internal classes of the Maven core. But there's another one. There's comparable version. And that's the one that's responsible for comparing versions. And it does that in a slightly different way. I really had to figure this out by trying over and over, going into the source code. So bear with me. If you want to understand how Maven treats versions, you need to understand what a canonical version is, because that's the first thing it will do when it starts comparing versions. It will transform your version string into a canonical version. First thing it does, in the version string, all characters, it will lowercase. So if you have any characters in there, they will be lowercased. Simple. Next, it will replace some well-known qualifiers. Okay, what are these? Well, there's actually 3. And note, only when they're directly followed by a number, nothing in between, an A will be replaced with alpha, a B will be replaced with beta, and an M will be replaced with milestone. This is important to remember. Then it will separate characters and digits by a dash, creating groups within your version. Next, it will replace some aliases it has. So that's these 4. So there are 3 aliases for empty string. That's GA, final, and release. So they're an alias for empty string. Essentially, they're removed from what you have. And then there's CR that's replaced by RC. So my guess that's to please French people who would say candidat release. I don't hope I insult any French people in here. Release candidate. And finally, it will remove all the trailing zeros per group. Remember I said it will put dashes in between, so all the parts between a dash, and that's not an official term, but I called it groups, and everything that ends in a 0 will be smashed out. So let's look at some examples to get a grasp on this. The first version, 1.0.0. What will be the canonical version here? That's 1. The trailing zeros are left off. Then, of course, 1.0, also 1. This explains why these versions are considered equal by Maven. Then you have 1.0.0-snapshot. 1-snapshot, indeed, with lowercase snapshot. Then another simple example, 1.0.1, 1.0.1. Nothing fancy there. But we're getting into the more difficult bits. So 1.2.3 dash uppercase A 2. Anyone want to guess? Yeah, alpha 2, yeah, right. So the A is immediately followed by a number, so it becomes alpha, and then later on, alpha and 2 are separated by a dash. So it's 1.2.3 dash alpha dash 2. Then a very similar one, and this is a little tricky. I ran into this. 1.2.3 dash A dash 2. Exactly. There's no number directly after the A, so it's not replaced with alpha. So this will actually remain the same. Good, so maybe you have a version that's built up of your own version and a version of some external tool. For instance, JDK 17, in this case. So it will strip off the trailing zeros per group. So of the first group and of the second group. So you get this, 1.2-JDK-17. Here we have GA, which I would say stands for general available. And that's stripped off because GA is an alias for empty string. So you end up with 1.2.3. So last example, 1.2.3 CR1 will become 1.2.3 RC1 because CR is an alias for RC. Good, so now we know and have a little bit of a feel for what is a canonical version. Now, how does it go about ordering these things? How does it compare these versions? So the first thing it will do, it will try to order them per group. So it will first compare the first groups of two versions. And then if these are equal, it will continue with the second group. And if these are equal, it will continue with the third group. After that, within these groups, it will look per item, so the things that are separated by a dot. Same principle, it will first look at the first item, then at the second, then at the third. Now, how does it order them? Well, first, what comes first, so the oldest version, to say, are the well-known qualifiers, in order. And these are a little more than you saw before. This is alpha, beta, milestone, RC, snapshot, empty string, interesting one, SP. So note that of all the well-known qualifiers there's one that follows empty string, SP. I think server spec is the intention there. So empty string is what most people would say that's a final version. There's no qualifier involved. So you see where this is going. But we're not there yet. There's all the other string qualifiers in alphabetical order. And then we're left with the numbers. What we perceive as being the most important part comes at the bottom. So let's see if we can play a little game with this. Which version comes first? Well, this, for most of us, will be rather easy. We're familiar with snapshots. So comes first means is the oldest version. You see in small print below the canonical version that's derived. So next, 1.2.3 versus 1.2-3, which is the oldest the oldest version. The bottom one is because it's two groups. The bottom one, 1.2 and -3, and the first group is compared with the first group with the above. So another example. Let's see, 1.2.3 versus 1.2.3-A1. Which comes first? A1, indeed, because A1 is an A followed by a number, which is alpha, which ranks higher because it's a well-known qualifier. Then the other example, 1.2.3, versus 1.2.3-A-1. See, one character difference. A character that we might think is not important, but it is. Because in this case, it's not a well-known qualifier. It's just a string qualifier. And that comes after the well-known qualifier empty string. So this is a post-release version. Then another one, 1.2.3 versus 1.2.3-release. Anyone want to guess? The same, yes, exactly. Because, of course, release translates to empty string, and then you end up with the exact same versions. (1.2.3) versus 1.2.3-SP1. Anyone remembers? That one is the oldest because SP is the only well-known qualifier that comes after empty string. I think this is the last example. This is the most contrived one. If you have this in production, either fix it or run. Those are the two options you have, but let's go through them. Who thinks it's the top one? Who thinks it's the bottom one? Slightly more hands. So the people that are afraid to answer, I understand. But you were right, it's the bottom one. Because it goes per group. So you see both have first group 1.2.3. That's ignored. Second group 1.0 versus 1. They end up being the same in the canonical version. So ignored. So it comes up to the last part. And of course, 0.1 comes before 1. Right, so management summary of what we discussed here today. These simple cases are simple. It's just semver. We're used to that. We know how that works. Easy peasy. You can do that. And of course, if the simple cases are simple, the hard cases are hard. And they're really hard, as you've seen. So, end of story. Try to keep your versions as simple as possible. It's not an option I had, but if I would have had that, that was the first thing I would have done in that project. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention.